The saloon smelled like sawdust, whiskey, and men who hadn't decided yet whether the day would end in laughter or blood. Constance Archer walked through the door like she owned the floor beneath it. She didn't pause at the threshold. She didn't scan the room with wide eyes or clutch her satchel tighter. She simply walked to the bar, set her leather bag on the counter, and asked for water. The bartender stared. Half the room stared. A woman alone. Boston clothes. Gold-rimmed spectacles. Hair cut short and pinned back in a way that said she hadn't asked anyone's opinion about it. Cal Mercer noticed her from the far table before she'd finished her first sentence. He was a broad man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had learned early that size was its own argument. He ran cattle on 3,000 acres of disputed land and had not been told no in recent memory. He leaned back in his chair and watched her the way a man watches something he's already decided belongs to him. "You the woman from Boston?" he called across the room. Connie turned. "That depends on who's asking." Mercer stood. His two men stood with him, the way furniture moves when someone shoves a table. "Word came ahead of you," Mercer said, crossing the floor slowly. "Said you were carrying papers. Land papers." "I carry a great many things," Connie said. "I'll take a look at them." "You won't." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when someone says something that shouldn't have been said. Mercer stopped 2 feet from her. He was close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his coat. "Lady," he said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, "you don't know where you are." "I know exactly where I am," Connie said calmly. "Your cattle have been grazing on federal water access land for 14 months. She removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time. Then she placed them beside her bag. "That violates Section 14 of the Federal Land Act." She looked up at him over the rim of her spectacles. "Every animal you've watered there is trespassing on federal property." A brief silence settled over the saloon before Connie spoke again. "And the Boston Post prints my column every Thursday." Her expression never changed. "I imagine they'd find your operation very interesting." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Furthermore," Connie continued, her voice carrying cleanly through the silence, "my uncle's land deed was filed in the Harlan County courthouse in 1881 and witnessed by 2 federal surveyors. So whatever arrangement you believe you've made regarding that property, I'd encourage you to reconsider it before I finish my water." Mercer did not back down. He took a slow, heavy step closer to the bar. His boots scraped against the sawdust floor. "You speak well for a city woman," Mercer sneered. His voice was low and dangerous. "But law books don't mean much out here. The courthouse is 50 miles away. The sheriff is my cousin. And the federal judges don't care about a few acres of dirt in Harlan County." Connie kept her hand steady on her water glass. She did not blink. "The Boston Post cares," she replied smoothly. "And the Federal Land Office in Washington cares very much about stolen public water." Mercer's face darkened. He leaned his large frame over the counter. He wanted to look down at her. He wanted to make her look small. "Out here, Miss Archer, power belongs to the man who can keep it," Mercer whispered. "Your uncle thought he could hold a line too. Look what happened to him." The reminder of her uncle made Connie's jaw tighten. But her eyes remained cold and sharp behind her spectacles. Mercer's hand moved toward her bag. A sound came from the corner of the room. Not loud. Just the slow, deliberate click of a revolver being cocked. Every head turned. In the far corner, a man sat alone at a table with a half-empty glass and a Colt revolver, now resting in his hand, pointed with casual precision at the back of Cal Mercer's skull. He hadn't stood up. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply sat there with the gun extended and an expression of mild, almost bored interest on his face. "She said no," the man said. His voice was low and steady. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because the room already understood it. Mercer went very still. "Gideon Cross," one of Mercer's men breathed. The name moved through the saloon like a cold draft under a door. Men shifted. A few stepped back without meaning to. Gideon Cross set his glass down with one hand and kept the gun level with the other. Gideon looked at Mercer calmly, like a man who had faced violence many times before, like it no longer surprised him. "Heard the lady mention the Boston Post," Gideon said. "Seems like bad timing to make the papers, Cal." Mercer's hands opened slowly at his sides. He stepped back. His men stepped back with him. "This isn't finished," Mercer said. "It is for tonight," Gideon replied. Mercer turned and walked out. His men followed. The door swung shut behind them, and the room exhaled. The heavy oak door bounced twice on its hinges before settling. The silence in the saloon remained. No one moved. No one picked up a glass. The old bartender let out a long, shaky breath. He looked toward the dark corner of the room. His hands were still trembling as he held a dirty towel. "Thank you, Mr. Cross," the bartender muttered quietly. He kept his eyes lowered, looking at the floor. Gideon did not answer. He slowly uncocked his Colt revolver with a soft, metallic click. He slid the heavy weapon back into his leather holster with perfect ease. He did not look at the bartender. He did not look at the remaining men in the room. A few cowboys at the nearby tables quickly paid their coins and hurried out the back door. They did not want to be in the same room with Gideon Cross. His reputation was well known, and nobody wanted to tempt fortune. The bartender turned back to Connie. His attitude had completely changed. There was no more staring. There was only deep, cautious respect. Connie picked up her gloves. She did not look toward the corner. She finished her water, set the glass down, and said to the bartender, "Is there a room available?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'll take it." She picked up her bag and walked toward the stairs. Only at the bottom step did she pause, not turning fully, just enough for her voice to carry. "Thank you," she said to the corner. A pause. "Don't thank me," Gideon said. "I just didn't want the noise." She found him the next morning at the edge of town, saddling a horse outside the livery with the focused efficiency of a man who preferred not to be interrupted. She interrupted him anyway. "You knew my uncle," Connie said. Gideon didn't look up. "Knew a lot of people. Thomas Archer. He filed land on the South Ridge in 1881. He died 8 months ago." She paused. "The county report says it was an accident." "County reports say a lot of things. You don't believe it was an accident." Gideon pulled the cinch tight and finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of flint, sharp and without warmth, the kind of eyes that had learned to give nothing away. "What I believe," he said, "doesn't change what you can prove." "Then help me prove it." He turned back to the horse. "No. Cal Mercer's land borders yours on the North Ridge," Connie said. "He's been pushing your fence line for 2 years. My uncle's deed creates a legal buffer that protects your water rights. If I lose that land, Mercer takes the creek access, and your cattle die in the next dry summer." Gideon's hands stilled on the leather. "I've done the survey calculations," Connie continued. "I have the original deed, the federal filing, and 3 years of water usage records. What I don't have is someone who knows this land well enough to testify to the boundary markers." She met his eyes steadily. "You do." The silence stretched. "You're going to be trouble," Gideon said. "Almost certainly," Connie agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he untied the horse and handed her the reins. "There's a line cabin on the South Ridge," he said. "Mercer's men have been watching the main road. If you want to reach the boundary markers without being seen, we go tonight." Connie took the reins. "Tonight, then." The line cabin was small, cold, and smelled of old wood smoke and dried grass. 1 room, 1 table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot against the far wall, and a fireplace that drew well enough to keep the worst of the November chill at bay. Gideon built the fire without comment. Connie spread her documents across the table and began organizing them by date. "You always travel with this much paper?" Gideon asked. "You always travel with that many guns?" She replied without looking up. He sat down across from her and pulled the nearest document toward him. He read in silence, his expression unchanged, but his eyes moved carefully across the lines. Connie noticed that. He read the way a man reads when he actually intends to understand something, not just confirm what he already thinks. "This survey marker," he said, pointing. "It's listed as a cedar post at the creek bend." "Yes. That post washed out in the flood of '83. Mercer knows it. He's been claiming the boundary shifted with it." Connie looked up. "Can you prove where it stood?" "I helped set it," Gideon said. "Your uncle hired me the summer I came back from the territories. I was 22. We spent 3 days on that ridge with a compass and a federal surveyor." He paused. "Thomas Archer was a careful man. He documented everything. Then where is the documentation?" "That's what I've been trying to find for 8 months." Gideon leaned over the table, his rough fingers tracing a faint pencil line on the old map. His shoulder was nearly touching hers. "Thomas kept a secondary record," Gideon said softly. "He told me about it during the autumn muster. He said he had a secret cache, a place where neither Mercer nor his hired thugs could ever find it." Connie leaned closer to look where his finger pointed. She could smell the scent of pine wood and leather on him. It was a comforting smell in the cold night. "Did he give you a key? Or a landmark?" she asked. Gideon shook his head slowly. "No. Mercer's men started watching him too closely after that. We couldn't speak openly anymore. But Thomas was smart. He wouldn't destroy the truth. He wanted it found. Connie picked up a smaller piece of paper from her leather bag. It was a personal note her uncle had sent her 2 years ago. "Look at the handwriting here," Connie said, pointing to the bottom of the page. He used a specific numbering system for his personal library in Boston. He always linked important files to his working equipment. They looked at each other across the table. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the grass with a low, steady sound. "He trusted you," Connie said. "He was one of the few people out here who did." She heard something in that sentence that he hadn't meant to leave visible. She didn't press it. They worked until past midnight, cross-referencing deed filings against survey records, tracing the chain of land transfers that Mercer had quietly engineered over 3 years. Connie wrote quickly, her handwriting small and precise. Gideon read over her shoulder occasionally, correcting dates, adding names she didn't recognize. At some point the fire burned low, and neither of them noticed. At some point their chairs had moved closer together, without either of them deciding to move them. Gideon reached past her to point at a line in the document, and his arm brushed her shoulder. Neither of them moved away. "Here," he said. "This transfer. It's dated 2 weeks after your uncle died." Connie leaned in. "That's Mercer's signature. And that's a county clerk who retired to New Mexico 6 months later with enough money to buy a house." Connie sat back. "He bribed the clerk." "He bribed the clerk," Gideon confirmed. She looked at him. He was close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face, the years of it, the particular exhaustion of a man who had been fighting something alone for too long. "We can prove this," she said. "Maybe," he said, "if we can find the original survey notes." "Where would they be?" Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle had a habit of hiding important things in plain sight." He paused. He kept a ledger. Not a financial ledger. A record ledger. Dates, names, measurements. He called it his memory book. "I didn't find anything like that in his belongings. Because it wouldn't have been with his belongings." Gideon stood. "It would have been with his tools." They rode out before dawn, the sky still dark and thick with stars. The land opened around them as they climbed, the scrub giving way to open ridge, the creek a silver thread far below. Gideon rode ahead, reading the terrain the way other men read text, his body easy in the saddle, his attention moving constantly across the landscape. Connie watched him and thought about what it meant to know a place that deeply, to carry its geography in your bones. She had grown up in cities. She understood buildings, streets, the architecture of institutions. She understood how power moved through paper and law and the careful arrangement of words. Out here, power moved differently. It moved through land and water and the willingness to hold a line. "You grew up here?" she asked. "No," Gideon said. "I came here." "From where?" A pause. "Everywhere else." She let it rest. They rode in silence for a while, the horse's breath visible in the cold air, the ridge rising ahead of them. "He talked about you," Gideon said eventually. Connie looked up. "My uncle?" Said his niece in Boston was the sharpest person he'd ever met. Said she'd argue a judge into a corner, and then apologize so politely he'd thank her for it. A pause. "He was proud of you." Connie looked at the horizon. Something tightened in her throat. "He never said that to me," she said. "Men like him rarely do," Gideon said. "Doesn't mean it wasn't true." They reached the old tool shed as the sky began to lighten, a low structure half hidden by cedar growth, its door swollen with age. Gideon forced it open with his shoulder. Inside, the smell of rust and old leather and something else, something dry and papery. He went straight to the back wall, lifted a rusted hand plow aside, reached into the gap behind it, and pulled out a flat tin box. He handed it to Connie without ceremony. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a ledger. Small, dense, filled with her uncle's careful handwriting. Dates, measurements, names, witness signatures. And at the back, folded twice, a letter addressed in her uncle's hand. "For Constance, when she comes." Her hands were very still. "He knew," she said. "He knew," Gideon said quietly. She unfolded the letter. "Read it once. Read it again." Her uncle's voice came through the words with such clarity that for a moment the shed felt crowded with his presence. "The land is yours by right. Don't let them tell you otherwise. And if Gideon Cross is still standing, trust him. He's the only man out here who kept his word to me." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the tin. "He was right about you," she said. Gideon said nothing. But something in his face shifted, something that had been held very tightly for a long time. They were back at the cabin by mid-morning when the smoke appeared on the south ridge. Not cook-fire smoke. Not chimney smoke. The thick, rolling black column of something burning that shouldn't be burning, climbing fast against the pale sky. Gideon was on his horse before Connie reached the door. "Stay here," he said. "That's my uncle's land," she said. "Connie," she was already saddling her horse. He didn't argue again. They rode hard, the smoke thickening as they climbed, the smell reaching them before the heat did. By the time they crested the ridge, the fire had taken the dry grass along the boundary line and was moving toward the cedar stand where the original survey markers stood. Mercer's work. It didn't need to be said. Gideon rode straight into the smoke, cutting toward the cattle that had bunched against the far fence, panicked and pressing. Connie went left, toward the creek, where the fire hadn't yet reached, pulling her bandana up over her nose and working to drive the nearest animals toward the water. The smoke was thick and low. Her eyes burned. The horse beneath her was frightened but responsive, trusting her hands on the reins even when instinct said to bolt. She heard the crack before she saw it. A cedar, its base burned through, tilting and then falling with a sound like a rifle shot. She heard Gideon shout, a single sharp sound cut off too quickly. She turned. He was down. The tree had caught him across the legs, pinning him to the ground, his horse bolting free into the smoke. He was conscious, pushing against the trunk with both hands, his face tight with pain and effort. Connie rode to him and dismounted before the horse fully stopped. "How bad?" she said. "Get out of here," he said through his teeth. "How bad, Gideon?" "I can't move it." She looked at the trunk. Thick. Heavy. But the ground beneath it was soft from the creek's moisture, and there was a broken fence post 6 feet away. She got the post. She found the fulcrum point, a rock half buried in the dirt, and she worked the post beneath the trunk with both hands, her arms shaking, the smoke pressing down around them. "When it lifts," she said, "you pull yourself clear." "It won't lift enough." "When it lifts," she repeated. She put her weight on the post. Every muscle in her body argued. The trunk shifted. 1 inch. 2 inches. "Now," she said. Gideon dragged himself sideways, his jaw locked, his hands clawing at the dirt. The trunk settled back. He was clear. Connie dropped the post and knelt beside him. His leg was bruised badly, possibly worse, but he was moving it, which meant it wasn't broken through. "Can you stand?" "Give me a minute." "We don't have a minute." He looked at her. Smoke-streaked, her jacket singed at the hem, her spectacles smudged and slightly crooked. She was breathing hard and her hands were shaking, and she was looking at him with an expression that had no patience left in it for anything except getting them both out alive. He reached up and took her hand. She pulled. He got upright, one arm across her shoulders, his weight heavy against her. They moved toward her horse, slow and unsteady, the fire crackling behind them. They reached the creek. The air was cleaner there. Gideon sat heavily on the bank and Connie stood beside him, both of them breathing. After a long moment, Gideon said, "You used a lever." "Archimedes," Connie said. "Give me a place to stand, and I'll move the world." He looked at her. Something in his face had come undone, the careful flatness of it, the practiced distance. His eyes were red from the smoke and something else. "Connie," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't say something you'll regret when the adrenaline wears off." "I'm not going to regret it." She looked at him. "I've been alone on this land for 6 years," he said. "I told myself that was a choice." He paused. It wasn't a choice. It was just what was left after everything else was gone. The fire crackled in the distance. The creek moved past them, indifferent and steady. "My uncle trusted you," Connie said. "Your uncle was a better judge of character than I deserved." He was right, though. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and very carefully straightened her spectacles. It was such a small gesture. So quiet. So entirely unlike the man she had watched hold a gun on Cal Mercer without blinking. Gideon's hand lingered near her face for a second longer. His thumb gently brushed a streak of black soot from her cheek. His touch was surprisingly soft for a man who lived by the gun. Connie looked up at him through her clear lenses. Her breath caught in her throat. The distance between them had completely vanished. "You almost died today, Gideon," she whispered. Her voice was not steady anymore. "I didn't," he replied. His eyes were locked onto hers. "Because a stubborn woman from Boston decided to fight a cedar tree for me." "It was simple mechanics," she managed to say, trying to regain her professional composure. "A lever always works." Gideon let out a quiet, rough sound that was almost a chuckle. "Call it mechanics if you like, Connie. But I know what I saw. You didn't run." The wind blew a stray piece of ash across the running creek. The smoke in the sky was starting to thin out, turning from black to a soft gray. Connie felt the heat of his hand against hers. For the first time in her life, the law books in her mind felt distant. The man standing in front of her felt real. Connie felt something shift in her chest, something that had been braced for a long time. "The ledger," she said. "We need to get it to the county seat before Mercer realizes what we found." "Tomorrow," Gideon said. "Tonight would be better." "Tonight," he said. "You're going to let me make sure you didn't burn yourself getting me out of there." She opened her mouth. "Connie." She closed it. "All right," she said. "Tonight." The county seat was a day's ride east, a proper town with a federal land office and a judge who had not yet been purchased by Cal Mercer's money. They rode out at first light, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth in Connie's satchel, the letter folded inside her coat against her chest. Gideon rode with his legs stiff but functional, his jaw set against the discomfort in the way of a man who had decided pain was not relevant to the current situation. They didn't talk much on the road. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed overnight, had lost its careful edges, had become the kind of quiet that two people share when they've stopped performing composure for each other. At midday they stopped at a creek crossing to water the horses. Connie sat on a flat rock and ate the bread she'd packed. Gideon stood at the water's edge and watched the current. "What will you do?" he asked. After the land is settled? After all of it?" Connie considered. "I have a story to write. The land fraud angle alone is worth 3 columns. The bribed clerk, the forged transfer, the arson." She paused. "It'll make the national papers." And then, she looked at him. "Are you asking if I'm leaving?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I came here for my uncle. I stayed for the truth." She paused. "I haven't thought past that." Gideon turned from the water. "Think past it," he said. She held his gaze. "Why?" He crossed to where she sat and stopped in front of her. He was backlit by the noon sun, his face in shadow, but she could read his expression clearly enough. "Because I'd like you to," he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a speech. It was 6 words from a man who had spent years saying as little as possible, and it landed with the weight of everything he hadn't said. Connie stood up. They were very close. "You're going to have to do better than that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm working on it." She almost smiled. "Then you'd better learn quickly." He did something then that she hadn't expected. He laughed. A real laugh this time. Brief. Rough. Human. Connie stared at him. She had never seen him look younger. Connie thought, there he is. The Federal Land Office smelled like ink and old paper, and the particular authority of institutions that had been in the same building for decades. The clerk behind the counter was young, efficient, and visibly startled by the combination of a woman in riding clothes and a man with a Colt on his hip presenting a stack of documents at 2 in the afternoon. Connie set the ledger on the counter. "I need to file a challenge to a land transfer recorded in Harlan County," she said. "Transfer dated November 14th, 1887, from the estate of Thomas Archer to Calvin Mercer. I have the original deed, the federal survey record, witness signatures, and evidence of clerk misconduct in the original filing." The clerk looked at the ledger, looked at Connie, looked at Gideon. Gideon said nothing. He simply stood there, which was sufficient. "I'll need to call the supervising officer," the clerk said. "Please do," Connie said. The supervising officer was a compact, careful man named Aldridge who read documents the way Connie did, thoroughly and without expression. He went through the ledger page by page. He read the letter. He examined the survey records. Then he looked up. "Miss Archer," he said, "this is a significant filing." "Yes," she said. "The transfer you're challenging involves a substantial property claim." "I'm aware. Cal Mercer has considerable influence in this district." "I'm aware of that too," Connie said. "I'm also aware that federal land law supersedes county influence, and that the evidence in front of you constitutes grounds for a full investigation into the original transfer." She paused. "I'd also note that I write for the Boston Post, and my editor is expecting a full account of this filing by Friday." Aldridge looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. "I'll need your full name for the record," he said. "Constance Eleanor Archer," she said. "Niece and legal heir of Thomas James Archer, deceased." He wrote it down. Outside, afterward, the afternoon light was long and golden across the street. Connie stood on the steps of the land office and breathed. Gideon stood beside her. "It'll take months," he said. The investigation. The hearings. I know. Mercer won't go quietly. He never does. A pause. You'll need somewhere to stay, Gideon said. While it's all sorted out. Connie looked at him sideways. Are you offering me a room? I'm offering you half a ranch, he said. The half your uncle's land connects to. He paused. And whatever else you decide to make of it. She turned to face him fully. The sun was behind him again, but this time she could see his face clearly, the careful hope in it, the vulnerability of a man who had stopped pretending he didn't want something. That's a significant offer, she said. It's an honest one. You barely know me. I know you rode into a burning field to pull a tree off a man who told you to leave, Gideon said. I know you memorized federal land law well enough to quote it in a saloon. I know you didn't cry once in 3 days of the hardest kind of work. He paused. I know enough. Connie was quiet for a moment. I'll need a proper desk, she said. For writing. I'll build you one. And I won't be told what stories to cover. Wouldn't dare. And if Cal Mercer sends men to the property, then Cal Mercer's men will have a conversation with me, Gideon said, that they won't enjoy. Connie looked at him. The afternoon light caught the angles of his face, the tiredness and the steadiness both, the particular quality of a man who had been alone long enough to know exactly what he was choosing when he chose otherwise. All right, she said. All right, she said again. I'll stay. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with flourish. Just his hand around hers, warm and certain, the way a man holds something he intends to keep. They stood on the steps of the federal land office in the long afternoon light, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the stage in Harlan County, Constance Archer felt the particular relief of a woman who had fought for something and won. Not just the land, not just the truth, but the right to stand somewhere and call it home. The investigation took 4 months. Mercer hired lawyers from Dallas. Connie wrote 3 columns for the Boston Post and 2 for the Houston Chronicle. The bribed clerk was located in New Mexico and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. The forged transfer was invalidated. The land reverted to the Archer estate. On the day the ruling came through, Gideon rode to the South Ridge alone and stood at the creek bend where the old survey marker had been. He stood there for a long time. When he came back, Connie was at the desk he'd built her writing. The lamp was lit. The cabin was warm. Outside, the land lay quiet under a clear winter sky. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. It's done, she asked. It's done, he said. She set down her pen. He crossed the room and sat across from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the table, where they had first spread out her uncle's documents and begun to understand what they were building together. He would have liked this, Connie said. Your uncle? He always said the land was worth fighting for. She paused. I think he meant more than the land. Gideon reached across the table. His hand covered hers. I think he did too, he said. Outside, the creek ran clear and uncontested along the boundary line. The cedar stand had grown back from the fire, green and stubborn, and entirely indifferent to the men who had tried to burn it down. The land remembered what it was. So did they. The story of Constance Archer and Gideon Cross ran in the Boston Post on March 14, 1888, under the headline, Land Fraud in the Texas Territory, One Woman's Fight for Justice. It was reprinted in 11 papers across the country. The desk Gideon built her stood in the South Ridge cabin for 40 years. They were married in the spring, in the yard, with the creek visible from where they stood and the cedar trees casting long shadows across the grass. The minister asked if anyone objected. No one did.